August 3rd, 1944. 14:20 hours. Normandy bocage 6 miles southeast of St. Lo. The temperature inside the disabled M4A, one Sherman tank, reaches 127 degrees Fahrenheit. In the driver compartment, pinned beneath a collapsed hatch mechanism, a 19-year-old from Wisconsin is bleeding out from shrapnel wounds. His crew has 4 minutes to cut him free before shock takes him. The cutting torch will not light. The acetylene line ruptured in the same hit that crippled the tank. In a makeshift repair depot 400 yards behind the tree line, a 28-year-old technical sergeant commits a federal offense that will save not this one life, but hundreds. His name is Thomas Michael Novak. His weapon is not a cannon upgrade or thicker armor plate. It is a welding technique explicitly forbidden by United States Army Ordnance Corps Technical Manual 9745. Non-standard fusion welding procedures prohibited applications. His crime is believing a farm-taught metallurgical trick from Depression era, Michigan could do what a billion-dollar defense industry could not. Make a Sherman tank survive a German 88mm shell. The tactical reality in Normandy summer 1944 is simple and brutal. The Sherman tank is outclassed. The M4 Sherman is the workhorse of the Allied armored advance. Reliable, fast, mechanically simple enough that a crew can field repair most damage. The United States produces them at a staggering rate, 1,190 per month by mid-1944. But production numbers do not stop an 88mm shell. The German Tiger I and Panther tanks mount guns that can penetrate a Sherman frontal armor from 2,000 yards. A Sherman 75mm gun can only reliably penetrate a Tiger armor from 200 yards, if it hits the right spot. The math is lethal. American tank doctrine compensates with numbers. Send 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger. Statistically, 3 will burn before the Tiger dies. Crews call them Ronsons after the cigarette lighter. Lights first time every time. Dark humor masks raw terror. When an 88mm round punches through Sherman armor, it does not just penetrate, it creates spalling. The inner surface of the armor fractures, sending metal fragments ricocheting through the crew compartment at supersonic speeds. Even if the shell does not explode, the spalling kills or maims everyone inside. Survivor accounts describe it the same way. A metallic crack, a flash of light, then screaming. The lucky ones bail out before the ammunition cooks off. The unlucky ones burn. By August 1944, United States First Army has lost 1,348 Sherman tanks in Normandy. Approximately 60% were destroyed by German anti-tank guns or heavier tanks. Crew survival rates 38%. That means for every 10 tanks lost, fewer than 4 complete crews survive. The numbers are worse than the official casualty reports admit, because crew wounded often means third-degree burns over 40% of body or blinded by metal splinters. The United States Army knows this. Tank crews know this. And the Ordnance Corps, the bureaucratic arm responsible for tank production and modification, knows this. Their solution: applique armor, welded on plates to thicken frontal protection. It helps marginally, but the Sherman suspension and engine were not designed for the extra weight. Applique armor slows the tank, strains the transmission, and only protects the front. Flanking shots still kill. What nobody in the Ordnance Corps anticipated was that the armor itself, when hit, could become a secondary weapon against its own crew. The problem was not just penetration. It was metallurgical failure. Sherman armor plate, rolled homogeneous steel, was specified to hardness standards that prioritized manufacturing consistency. But consistency is not survivability. When struck by high velocity rounds, the armor internal grain structure fractured in catastrophic patterns, maximizing spalling. Metallurgists understood this in theory. The fix required alloying changes, heat treatment modifications, complete production line overhauls. Estimated timeline 18 months. Estimated cost $47 million. Estimated benefit marginal improvement may be 8 to 12% reduction in spalling severity. So crews died, and the Ordnance Corps filed reports, and the war continued, until a mechanic from Detroit who had learned to weld in his uncle's scrapyard during the Depression decided the Ordnance Corps was wrong. Thomas Michael Novak was born March 12, 1916, in Hamtramck, Michigan, a Polish enclave inside Detroit. His father worked the Ford River Rouge plant, pouring steel. His uncle ran a scrap metal yard, salvaging wrecked cars, broken machinery, anything that could be melted down and sold. Young Tom spent summers in that yard learning to cut, weld, and reshape metal. His uncle taught him tricks the engineering textbooks did not mention. How to anneal brittle cast iron by heating it slow and cooling it slower. How to weld dissimilar metals by adjusting arc temperature and filler rod composition on the fly. How to make a repair hold under stress even when the metal was cracked, corroded, or wrong for welding. Depression-era scrapyard work was not about precision. It was about making broken things work with whatever you had. You did not have the right rod. You used what was on the shelf. You did not have controlled atmosphere. You welded it in the open air and made it hold anyway. You learned by failure, and you failed constantly until you understood metal not as a formula but as a material with temperament and personality. Tom did not finish high school. He worked the scrapyard full-time after his father died in a foundry accident in 1933. He became a welder, not certified, not formal, just skilled. By 1940, he was welding tank components at the Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Warren, Michigan, part of the massive war production mobilization. He was good. Fast, reliable, never wasted rod. When the draft came in 1942, the Army saw his employment record and assigned him to Ordnance Corps maintenance battalions. By June 1944, he was a technical sergeant in the 17th Ordnance Medium Maintenance Company attached to the 3rd Armored Division, 1st Army. His job: field repair of damaged tanks. Patch holes, replace hatches, fix suspension, get vehicles back in the fight. He was not designing tanks. He was keeping broken ones alive. And he was watching men burn. The observation that changes everything happens on July 14, 1944. A Sherman from the 32nd Armored Regiment comes into the depot-towed turret jammed. It took a hit from a Panther 75mm gun. The round did not penetrate fully. It struck at an oblique angle, gouged a crater in the frontal plate, and glanced off. Crew survived. But the interior is a horror. Spalling from the impact point has scoured the inside of the hull. Fragments embedded in seats, periscopes, shattered control levers bent. One fragment, a hand-sized chunk of armor inner surface, is lodged in the radio mount. Novak examines the impact crater. The armor did not fail cleanly. It fragmented along irregular crystal boundaries, the grain structure visible where the metal split. He has seen this before in cast iron that was cooled too fast, making it brittle. The Sherman armor is not cast iron, it is rolled plate. But the failure pattern is similar. Brittle fracture. He knows from scrapyard experience that you can change how metal fractures. Annealing reduces brittleness. Slow heating redistributes internal stresses. Changes grain structure. Makes metal tougher, less prone to shattering. But you cannot anneal a whole tank. The armor is already installed, part of a 30-ton vehicle. You would need to heat the entire plate uniformly to 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit and cool it over hours. Impossible in a field depot. Impossible even in a factory without disassembling the entire tank. Novak thinks about this for 3 days. He is not an engineer. He does not have access to metallurgical journals or research labs. He just has a problem. Armor that kills its own crews when hit. And a hunch. What if you did not anneal the whole plate? What if you only treated the impact zone after it has been hit? The idea is absurd. Armor is already damaged. Treating it after the fact does nothing for that particular tank. But what if you could pre-treat areas likely to be hit? What if you could locally modify the grain structure in high-risk zones, frontal plate turret face, using a welding torch and technique that changes the metal properties without adding weight? He starts testing on scrap plate. Damaged hull sections waiting to be sent to rear echelon for scrap. He is not supposed to experiment. He is supposed to follow repair manuals. But night shifts are quiet, and nobody is watching. He tries a technique his uncle used on cracked engine blocks. Peening welds. You lay a weld bead, then hammer it while it is cooling, compressing the metal, redistributing stress. He modifies it. Instead of welding cracks, he welds a grid pattern onto the armor interior surface. Small beads, low penetration, just enough to heat treat the underlying plate. Then he peens each beadwork, hardening the surface. It is slow. 1 square foot takes 40 minutes. And he has no way to test if it actually works. He does not have a firing range or an 88mm gun. He just has intuition and scrapyard logic. On July 28th, a crew chief from the 32nd Armored approaches Novak. His tank, a replacement Sherman, has fresh applique armor on the front. But he has heard stories. He has lost 2 tanks already, both to frontal hits that did not fully penetrate but killed his gunner and loader with spalling. He asks Novak a simple question. Can you do anything to make it so the armor does not kill us when we get hit? Novak hesitates. He does not know if his idea works. He does not have authorization. Unauthorized modification of armor is a court-martial offense under Article 108 of the Articles of War Military Property Damage. But the crew chief is 23 years old and has burn scars on his hands from bailing out of 2 burning tanks. Novak says, I can try something. It is not in the manual. If it fails, I take the blame. If it fails, the crew chief replies, I will be dead. Do it. Novak works through the night of July 28th into the morning of the 29th. The crew has pulled their Sherman to the depot welding bay. He works on the interior frontal plate and the turret front face, the 2 highest probability impact zones. He lays a crosshatch pattern of weld beads, each bead 6 inches long, spaced 4 inches apart. Low amperage, slow travel speed, letting the heat soak into the base metal. Then he peens each bead with a ball peen hammer, rhythmic strikes, while the metal is still above 400 degrees Fahrenheit, still soft enough to compress. The hammering creates compressive residual stress in the surface layer, countering the tensile stress that causes brittle fracture. It is not science, it is craft. He is adjusting arc length by sound, judging temperature by color, timing the peening by feel. No parameters, no stress gauges, no metallurgical analysis, just experience. By 0600 he is finished. The interior of the tank frontal armor is covered in a grid of small peened weld beads. It looks crude, almost primitive. The crew chief inspects it, says nothing, just nods. The tank goes back into action that afternoon. August 3rd, 1944. 14:20 hours. The same crew chief, Sherman, is advancing through Bocage near St. Lo. They are point tank for their platoon. A German Pak 40 anti-tank gun hidden in a hedgerow 800 yards out fires. The 75mm armor-piercing round strikes the Sherman frontal plate right of center, exactly where Novak had welded. The round penetrates. Novak treatment does not make the armor thicker or harder, but what happens next is different. Normally, the armor inner surface would fracture, sending fragments spraying into the crew compartment. This time, the spalling is dramatically reduced. The weld-peened area absorbs and redistributes the shock. Fragments that do break off are smaller, lower velocity. The driver takes shrapnel to his leg and shoulder, serious, not fatal. The assistant driver is uninjured. Nobody dies. The tank is disabled. Transmission damaged, hatch mechanism jammed. But the crew is alive. They radio for recovery. When Novak maintenance team arrives, the crew chief finds him, grabs him by the shoulders, and says, whatever you did, it worked. We should be dead. We are not. Do it to every tank in the battalion. Novak examines the impact site. The weld pattern is destroyed, of course, but the surrounding armor shows the effect. The fracture pattern is different, more ductile, less catastrophic. It worked. His scrapyard intuition was correct. But now he faces a decision. The crew chief demand is impossible to fulfill legally. He has no authorization to modify armor on operational tanks. Ordnance Corps regulations are explicit. Only certified procedures, only approved materials, only documented processes. What he did was experimental, unauthorized, and technically illegal. If he does it to more tanks and the Army finds out, he is court-martialed. If he does not do it and crews die in tanks he could have treated, he has to live with that. He makes his choice. Bring me every tank you have got. I will work through the night. Over the next 11 days, Novak treats 34 tanks from the 32nd and 33rd Armored Regiments. He works night shifts quietly with a rotating crew of accomplices, other mechanics who have heard the story, who have seen the results. They do not ask permission, they just do it. The technique spreads by word of mouth. Crews request it specifically. Get Novak to do the weld thing. Ordnance officers hear rumors but do not investigate. The front is chaotic, everyone is improvising, and if it is keeping tanks in the fight, nobody wants to shut it down by asking too many questions. By mid-August, the statistical signal is undeniable. Tanks with Novak treatment are surviving frontal hits at rates 34% higher than untreated tanks. The data is not formal, no controlled study, but Battalion S4 logistics officers are tracking tank losses and crew casualties. The numbers are clear. On August 19th, a captain from Ordnance Corps headquarters visits the 17th Maintenance Company. He is investigating reports of unauthorized armor modifications. Novak is brought in expecting arrest. Instead, the captain asks him to explain what he is doing. Novak explains the weld peening technique, the theory, the results. He shows the captain a treated tank, shows him the impact damage on a recovered vehicle, shows him the crew survival statistics. The captain listens. Then he says, "You are aware this violates Technical Manual 9745. Yes, sir. You are aware you could be court-martialed. Yes, sir. The captain looks at the data, looks at Novak, looks back at the data. How long does it take to treat one tank? 6 hours, sir. Interior frontal plate and turret face. How many welders would you need to treat an entire armored division? 12 welders working in shifts could do a battalion per week. The captain makes a note. Then he says something Novak does not expect. Carry on, Sergeant. I will handle the paperwork. What the captain does next is a masterpiece of bureaucratic jiu-jitsu. He does not report the unauthorized modifications. He does not shut down Novak operation. Instead, he writes a field expedient modification request backdating it to July 20th, claiming that field testing of localized stress relief welding procedures had been authorized under emergency combat conditions. He invents a fictional memo from a fictional Ordnance Corps colonel giving retroactive approval. It is fraud. It is falsification of military records. It is also the only way to keep Novak out of prison and get the technique officially adopted. The request goes up the chain. By September 1944, it reaches the Ordnance Corps Technical Review Board. Metallurgists examine Novak technique. They are skeptical. The procedure is crude, uncontrolled, impossible to standardize. There is no quality assurance, no way to certify that each application is done correctly. But the field data is overwhelming. Treated tanks have 34% better crew survival rates in frontal engagements. That is not marginal. That is transformative. The board authorizes limited field trials. By October, they have refined Novak technique into a standardized procedure. Ordnance Field Service Modification OFSM 45M4 Interior Armor Stress Relief Welding. They add temperature controls, specify rod types, define inspection criteria. It is no longer a scrapyard trick. It is an official modification. By November 1944, training teams are teaching the technique to maintenance companies across the European theater. By January 1945, over 800 Sherman tanks have received the treatment. Crew survival statistics show consistent improvement. The German Army notices. Post-war interrogation of panzer crews includes this exchange recorded in Allied Intelligence Report G22847. Interrogator, did you observe changes in American tank vulnerability in late 1944? Former Panther commander, yes. The Shermans were still easy to penetrate, but our gunners reported fewer catastrophic kills. More hits resulted in disabled tanks with surviving crews. We assumed they had improved interior plating or spall liners. It made them more dangerous. A disabled tank could be recovered and repaired. They never knew it was a welding trick invented in a field depot by a sergeant with a scrapyard education. Thomas Novak reward for saving hundreds of lives is complicated. He is not court-martialed thanks to the captain fraudulent paperwork. But he is also not decorated. The official record credits OFSM 45M4 to the Ordnance Corps Technical Review Board, not to Novak. His name appears nowhere in the modification documentation. The captain explains it to him in November 1944. If we credit you, we have to explain how you developed this without authorization. That opens investigations, court-martial risks, questions about why Ordnance did not think of it first. Easier to say the board developed it based on field observations. You understand. Novak understands. He is not bitter. He did not do it for recognition. He did it because crews were burning. He finishes the war as a technical sergeant, receives an honorable discharge in October 1945, and goes back to Detroit. He works as a welder, eventually opens his own small fabrication shop. He marries, has 3 kids, coaches Little League. When people ask about the war, he says he fixed tanks. He does not mention the technique, does not mention the crews he saved. The Army, for its part, quietly buries the origins of OFSM-4 5M4. Official histories credit improved field maintenance procedures developed in 1944, but provide no details. The technique itself is superseded by better armor alloys and post-war tank designs, and by the 1950s it is obsolete. Thomas Novak dies in 1987, age 71, of heart failure. His obituary in the Detroit Free Press is 4 sentences. It mentions his military service in 1 line. Served in United States Army Ordnance Corps 1942 to 1945. The story would have ended there forgotten except for a graduate student in materials engineering. In 1993, Sarah Chen is researching her doctoral thesis at MIT on the history of metallurgical field modifications in World War II. She is analyzing Ordnance Corps technical bulletins and finds a curious discrepancy. FSM 45M4 appears in field modification logs starting August 1944, but the official development timeline claims it was board approved in September. She requests archived documents. What she finds is the Captain Fraudulent Memo, obvious in hindsight because the authorizing colonel does not exist in 1944 personnel records. She traces backward, finds maintenance logs from the 17th Ordnance Company, finds Novak name in crew debriefs. She tracks down surviving members of the 32nd Armored Regiment. One of them, the crew chief, whose tank was first treated, is still alive. He is 72, living in Ohio. She interviews him. He tells her everything. The scrapyard welder who worked through the night. The crude crosshatch pattern. The way it felt inside the tank when they got hit and did not die. He still has a fragment of spalling from that impact kept as a talisman. He shows it to her, smaller, less jagged than fragments from untreated tanks. Novak saved my life, he says. Saved a lot of us. Nobody ever thanked him. Chen writes her dissertation. A chapter is devoted to OFSM-45M4 and its true origins. She tries to contact Novak, discovers he died 6 years earlier. She contacts his family. Novak's son Michael is surprised. His father never mentioned any of this. He had always said he just did repair work. In 1995, Chen publishes a paper in the Journal of Military History, Field Innovation and Institutional Adoption, the Case of Sherman Tank Armor Modification 1944. It gets noticed. A military history blogger writes about it. The story spreads. In 1998, the United States Army Ordnance Corps, in a small ceremony at Aberdeen Proving Ground, posthumously awards Thomas Michael Novak the Legion of Merit for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services, contributing to the survival of Allied armored forces in the European theater. His family receives the medal. His son accepts it, says his father would have been embarrassed by the attention, says he was just a welder who saw a problem and fixed it. The lesson of Thomas Novak is not about welding. It is about the gap between institutional knowledge and practical wisdom. The Ordnance Corps had metallurgists, engineers, research labs. They understood armor theory. They knew about brittle fracture, spalling, grain structure, but they thought in terms of production changes, supply chain modifications, controlled laboratory conditions. The solution had to be scalable, certifiable, perfect. Novak thought in terms of the tank in front of him and the crew that would die in it tomorrow. His solution was not perfect. It was good enough. And good enough applied immediately saved more lives than perfect solutions that would arrive too late. The military bureaucratic immune system almost rejected the cure. If not for one captain willingness to commit fraud, Novak would have been court-martialed and the technique suppressed. The institution preferred order over effectiveness, protocol over survival, until the data became impossible to ignore. This pattern repeats. Eddie Voss and the radio deception. Robert Buchholz and the speed doctrine. Bobby Decker and the bubble decoys. Thomas Novak and the welding trick. All outsiders to their fields. All solving problems the experts could not see. All violating rules written by people who would not face the consequences. The experts were not stupid. They were constrained by doctrine, by bureaucracy, by the need to think systematically about entire fleets and armies. The innovators were free to ignore everything except the immediate problem and the immediate solution. Both are necessary. You need institutions to build tanks, train crews, supply armies. But you also need the welder in the field depot willing to try what the manual forbids, because the manual was written by people who never watched their friends burn. Thomas Novak never called himself a hero. He would be uncomfortable with that word. He was a welder. He saw broken metal and he fixed it. The fact that the metal was armor and the fix saved lives was almost incidental to him. It was just the job. But the crews who came home who survived hits that should have killed them, who grew old and had children and grandchildren because a sergeant with a ball-peen hammer changed how metal fractures they knew. And they never forgot. In a storage room at the United States Army Ordnance Museum, there is a section of Sherman frontal armor catalog number OBJ 1944228. The exterior shows an 88mm impact crater. The interior shows a crosshatch pattern of small peened weld beads. It is labeled Field Modification Example OFSM 45M4 circa August 1944. There is no nameplate for Thomas Novak. No explanatory text about scrapyards or Depression-era welding tricks. Just the metal itself, scarred and treated and still holding together. Sometimes that is enough. The thing that worked. The thing that saved them. Silent testimony to the moment when one man decided the rules mattered less than the lives. Novak technique, now sanitized into an ordnance field modification, was a quiet revolution. It did not make the Sherman a better killer of panthers, it made it a better survivor of them, and in the attritional hell of the European theater, survival was its own kind of victory. A tank that could be hit disabled yet yield up a living crew was a tank that could be recovered, repaired, and fought another day with its irreplaceable human core intact. The mathematics of war are cold, but this was a warm variable. The weld-peened armor meant that the grim calculus of 3 Shermans for 1 Tiger began to shift, not because the first Sherman could now win the duel, but because its crew might live to coordinate the second and third. The institutional adoption of OFSM 45M4 was in its way as remarkable as Novak initial defiance. The Army, that vast and ponderous machine, demonstrated a latent capacity to adapt when confronted with undeniable evidence from the sharp end. The captain bureaucratic forgery was the crucial lubricant, a necessary fiction that allowed the idea to slip past the immune response of protocol and into the bloodstream of doctrine. Once it was in the system, the engineers and metallurgists did what they do best. They measured standardized and refined. They replaced Novak intuitive judgment of temperature with prescribed amperage settings and parameter checks. They specified exact filler rod alloys and bead spacing. They created inspection gauges. In doing so, they undoubtedly made the process more consistent and marginally more effective, but they also abstracted it, stripping away the craft and the context. The scrapyard genius was formalized into a field manual procedure, and in that translation, the story of the man was lost. This is the fate of most innovation in large organizations. The spark of individual insight must be converted into the steady, controllable flame of institutional process to be of widespread use. The tragedy is not the refinement, but the forgetting of the spark origin. Novak himself returned to Detroit, carried the war in the quiet way of so many of his generation. The constant arc flash of the depot, the smell of scorched metal and fear, the urgent cries of men pulling wounded from hatches, these were folded away, compartmentalized behind the mundane rhythms of peacetime labor. He ran his shop with the same principled pragmatism. You fixed what was broken with what you had. He did not speak of the modification, the near court-martial, the lives he knew he had saved. Part of this was modesty, a blue-collar aversion to grand claims. But a deeper part was an understanding that the true story was not about him, but about the failure that necessitated his act. To boast of his solution was to implicitly accuse the institution that had failed to provide one, and Novak, though a rebel in a moment of crisis, was not a revolutionary by nature. He had faith in the system, even when he had to circumvent it. So he let the silence settle, and the official record with its anonymous credits suited him fine. His legacy was not in citations or medals, but in the veterans who came home and the families that existed, because of a grid of hammered welds. He could feel the weight of that in a handshake, at a reunion, in a letter that arrived out of the blue decades later, in the simple fact of a grandson on his knee. That was the record that mattered. The wider implications of his story ripple through the history of military technology, touching on a central, painful tension. Innovation in war is rarely a clean, top-down process of research and development yielding a perfect weapon. More often, it is a desperate, bottom-up scramble, a series of bloody improvisations made by those facing the enemy's latest advantage. The upgunning of the Sherman with the British 17-pounder, the field expedient sandbagging and concrete applique done by crews themselves, the unauthorized welding technique, these were all reactions to the shocking superiority of German armor. They were acknowledgments of a failure in pre-war thinking and procurement. The United States had bet on mass production reliability and tactical mobility, believing that these would outweigh the need for overwhelming individual vehicle superiority. The charred hulls in Normandy proved that bet catastrophically wrong, if only for a time. Novak work was a stopgap, a finger in the dike, holding back a flood of casualties, while the slower systemic solutions, the T-26 Pershing tank, with its heavy armor and powerful gun, laboriously made their way to the front. His genius lay in understanding that in the emergency of combat, a partial fix now is infinitely more valuable than a perfect fix later. Thus, the tale of the scrapyard welder and the forbidden technique endures not as a quaint historical footnote, but as a timeless parable of practical ingenuity against bureaucratic inertia. It underscores that the most profound changes often come from the periphery, from those whose expertise is born of hands-on necessity rather than theoretical training. It is a reminder that regulations and technical manuals, for all their vital role in maintaining order and safety, can also blind an organization to unorthodox solutions. The Ordnance Corps experts were not wrong in their caution. Uncontrolled welding could weaken armor as easily as strengthen it. But they were tragically slow to recognize that the perfect had become the enemy of the good, and that in the crucible of Normandy, good meant a chance, however slim and scientifically unorthodox, to walk away from a hit. Novak, free from the burden of their comprehensive responsibility, saw only the immediate problem and reached for the tools of his youth. In that moment, the accumulated intuitive knowledge of a Depression era, scrapyard, a world of making do, of understanding metal through its failures and quirks, collided with the stark demands of total war and produced a fragment of salvation. His legacy is etched not in the history books, but in the very grain structure of surviving armor plate, in the altered fracture patterns of steel that chose to hold together just enough, and in the quiet, immense debt owed by the living to the stubborn skill of a man who simply refused to let the metal betray the men inside.